I'm Coach Tarek.
And I'm Vanessa.
We are your movement experts, and we are here to educate health and fitness professionals with the tools to create real change for and within the industry. Hey, it's your co-host, Tarek. My guest today is Daniel Pender, an Australian fitness and health industry expert who's been around about 15 years and has really evolved from being a trainer to being a franchise expert working with Jets Fitness. The information that you're going to get from this incredible interview with Daniel is for those in particular who are looking to open up their facility, whether wanting to franchise or whether to wanting to go out on your own. There's some really golden nuggets here, in particular understanding the three pillars of real estate. So really getting to understand things like the DA approvals and all of those subtleties that can make a big difference in making a decision about location. The second is marketing, putting an effective a pre-marketing plan together. And the third is your team and support. So ensuring that you get the right people in the bus. And a lot of people, they don't do any reflective thinking on this yet. This can take months to kind of get going and percolating before even stepping foot in creating your own facility. So stay tuned for this incredible episode. Check out FTI's latest offer, which is 15% off of any of our online courses. Simply go to www.functionaltraininginstitute.com and input PDM15 at cart checkout. I'm here with Dan Pender, who is associated with Jets Fitness in a broad range of roles. He's got a fascinating story that we're looking forward to listening into. Dan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, mate. Lovely to join you, mate. It's been listening for a very long time, so it's good to be on.
Thanks, mate. Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you. And particularly this topic that we're going to discuss today, which looks at balancing growth and sustainability. We're going to look at it from a lens of, let's say, Jets Fitness and the kind of history of growth explosion in Australia, and then kind of look at some of the principles as how they apply for anyone wanting to kind of branch out or open up their own facility. So we're looking forward to that, Dan. Tell us a little bit more about this topic and what the listeners are going to be looking out for.
Yeah, look, I think overarchingly, it certainly relates to any industry. I think growth in general, like growth comes with a lot of caveats. And I guess we'll sort of dive into maybe some potential tangible tips around what to look out for and touch on some of principles that I've learned along the way, either directly or indirectly. So I think that's probably where we'll start on, and maybe along the way touch on my journey through the health and fitness sector as well.
Yeah, well, let's start with your journey, because that's always a fascinating one to see how that story then has kind of evolved and allowed you to be, really in the position you are today as a leader.
Yeah, definitely, mate. Yeah, it depends who you ask around fascinating, mate. Yeah, look, I started in the fitness industry at a really exciting time. So I was part of one of the sort of quotation mark big four gyms in Australia. So I started with a brand in Sydney in early 2010. And that was a really interesting time. So if people that are as old as myself and maybe yourself will probably know, circa 15 years ago, it was the health club era. So it was the squash courts, the tennis courts, the swimming pool. So I came in right at sort of the early end of that period. And it was an exciting time in the sense that the founders that I was working quite closely with were entering into the franchise market, and specifically for them launching in Sydney. So if I cast my eye back a bit further, I go Jets started first in 2007. Not long after was Anytime Fitness in 2008. Then the brand that I was working with, 3 years later entered the market. So, that was really exciting for me from a skill set perspective, because, in the space of 24 months, there was over 20 new business owners coming on board. And the foundation principles that I got taught very, very early on was from a sales perspective. So the founders were, quite big on sales. Obviously, given the units of franchise that were getting sold, there was principles set out to, all members that worked under them that sales skills was number one. And then second to that, probably the second skills that I learned very early on, somewhat indirectly, is when I went out on my own with the guidance of the founders to become a sole operator. So if I just kind of talk through that journey, for the first 3 years of assisting in the franchising space, I was also doing my fitness certificates like a lot of people. And I was obviously, under their tutelage, okay at the sales perspective. So I thought, look, I could probably merge these two together. Didn't have the capital to go into opening a 24/7 club, but I certainly did have enough to go into a smaller studio. So that was sort of my first dip into acquiring skills into, leasing, which is a pillar that I think everyone should expose themselves to. And if I talk about that process, and I was reflecting on it offline with a friend actually just in prep of this, and I actually remember there was a key moment that actually happened when I was looking at 2 sites. So what we'll talk about here is leasing principles. So I was looking at 2 sites. One was located in an industrial warehouse, about a quarter of the price of this other tenancy. So it might have been about $2,000 a month for this one versus the other one that was, $6,000 plus. So this was an industrial complex. The rent was really, really low. There was, somewhat of an incentive to get in. The other option was, 3 to 4 times more, but it was located in a little village hub. There was an IGA, there was a doctor, there was a childcare and a few other tenancies. And I remember my mentor at the time, because I looked at it and I thought, look, my cash flow is not great because I'm starting a new venture. It seemed, to me like a no-brainer to go the low barrier of entry, to go the warehouse, to get in there and rely on my skill set to draw in clientele. My mentor at the time, which was obviously a founder of, opening up the 24/7 brand, said, look, Dan, all I can say is just go this one. Sort of quickly exposed me to what tenancy mix should be to rely on it. And it didn't dawn on me till a couple of years later because I thought, okay, I took option A, which is with the tenancy mix. I did quite well. I put on some trainers. The success was quite great. And I reflected a few years into it. I thought, it's actually not because of my skill set, because all my referrals are walk-ins, from childcares and just the nearby tenancy mix. So if I stop there, and if I was to share that, I guess, with your listeners, I think that's a really key piece of advice is don't always be, swayed by the low barrier to entry offers out there. And I think in general in Australia, there has been that, if I look at a lot of gyms that did open in the 2010s to 2016, they did take the industrial gym. They went and opened in there. And now I look at 2023 onwards, all brands, inclusive of us, Jets, we are looking for that ideal tenancy mix to make it what I would refer to it as a defendable location that you're going to have sort of guaranteed foot traffic. So circling back into sort of my journey, I sort of opened that studio. I still had a foot in the franchising space, assisting new business owners open up their clubs. And, about 4 to 5 years passed, my lease came to the expiry and I just went straight in on the franchising space into, an operational sales side, which has always sort of been my forte. And, long story short, I won't bore you with some of the basics and the milestones along there. Kind of worked my way into where I am now, which is much more leasing focused, but I've always come from a position of performance. And what does performance look like? Because that is my history. And, the last 7 or 8 months since being with Jets, that's sort of my role now, which is head of franchising, identifying sites that are going to be profitable and, going to sustain success over a long period of time.
Yeah, it's brilliant. That's a great segue now into getting to some of the nuts and bolts of this. So from that story of really being guided, I think has been key. You had, either that decision to take one site, which is the industrial, and that was like alluring because of the price point, whereas you were talked into that tenancy mix, which is fascinating now because whether someone becomes a franchisee of Jets or anything else for that matter, or whether they're going out on their own, I feel that this is an important message for those thinking, it's so easy to open up a facility, but yet you've got all of these different factors. So I reckon, Dan, let's dive into some of those key elements to actually look at a particular site for anyone who's franchising or otherwise.
Yeah, and look, overarchingly, I think there's, the way I see it, any opportunity, there's 3 main pillars that I would suggest before you look at a business, you really research and get up to skill and learn the language of these 3 things. So that's real estate. That's the first one. It's the most pivotal one. I've seen really good operators unable to perform in bad real estate deals. On the flip side, I've seen really poor operators make great money in really good real estate deals. So the first pillar for me is pivotal. And what I mean by that is just understand the language. So it doesn't mean that you've got to go out and do a formal course in commercial real estate, but it's speaking to people and understanding the language. So learn what is incentive. What are we looking for on a lease term? Is it 10%, 20%? And if you're listening to this for the first time and you are thinking about buying a business and you're thinking, what is incentive? Well, that's a great starting point to work out because there's an incentive attached to most leases that will help you, set up your tenancy. facility, no matter what the business is, from hospo to gym to childcare. So understanding those sort of intricacies. The other part to understand in the real estate field is what are the handover condition terms. So you'll start hearing, as you familiarize yourself with real estate, you'll hear cold shell, you'll hear warm shell, you hear greenfield site, brownfield site. You'll hear all these terms, and understanding them will set you up for success, because then you can speak the tone. If someone's coming to you with an opportunity, if I gave you an example, if someone came to you and said, look, here's a really good deal. It's a greenfield site. It's 3 years from now. This is actually relevant to a deal I'm working on at the moment. There's a 3-year greenfield site coming up, which means they haven't started working on it. And the rent is, I'll just use a metaphorical number, it's $1,000 a week, which it's not for listeners. We know right now, again, hypothetically, that the commercial rent is $1,000 per week. So by you knowing what the opportunity is in 3 years, you can secure a really good deal because of the language that you've just learned. So that's the first pillar I would jump into. And equally, I'd love to know your thoughts. And obviously you've been in the industry a long time. Where does real estate sit for you?
Yeah, I've operated a couple of facilities, and like anyone, it wasn't a franchise. It was one in Sydney and St. Peters. We had to really negotiate hard and learn the hard way. So in the end, as an example, for my instance, it was me and the partners thought we got advice from a lawyer, and the advice was, we think in our opinion is okay to operate a gym from this particular site, which was light industrial. Now, what happened was that one of the neighbors sort of behind the gym, a set of terraces, and he ended up sort of complaining, and he complained directly to the council. And then it became this big kind of issue. These issues arose because it was quite ambiguous. Given that it was light industrial, it was even ambiguous to them as how we could operate. So on one hand, we got advice from a lawyer that said, in our opinion, and we went with it. In the end, we were able to stay there, thankfully, but we did learn the hard way. So I think it's really key to understand the intricacies of the language and really working with a team, at least from my experience, whether it be a good lawyer, a solicitor, and a good real estate agent for sure, because we didn't really have that. We actually ended up leasing from the landowner, so we didn't go direct to a real estate agent. So this advice is very, very important, because I learned the hard way, me and my business partners. So that's my experience, and I subsequently ended up purchasing a warehouse with my former business partner, who still operates the gym out of there in an industrial estate. That was a bit more smoother, but also looking at things like a DA, are there approvals in place? So yeah, I'd love to allow you to continue to expand on these pillars, mate, because they're so important.
For sure, yeah. I think even just to continue on the real estate piece, and for me, it's, one of the most pivotal one, equal to the next pillar. But as an example, when people come through my quotation mark pipeline, they're interested in a Jets franchise. We're very fortunate. We've got someone that's got 25 plus years experience in leasing. So, and they work independent to us to secure the best deal. So it's not us saying it's the best deal. But what I challenge the prospective business owner is I say, go make some cold calls to some sites to start off with, because it measures expectations and it gets you, as we said a bit earlier, just learn that language. So before anyone's probably looking to buy a site, speak to business owners, get eyes on what is commercial at the moment, learn things that you're speaking about, which are DA lodgements, like is your specific site going to be zoned correctly? So ahead of time, that will start to cast a smaller net or a wider net, depending on what you're looking for. But it's really can you learn, I just look at it as like a language, can you learn just as many basic words as quickly as possible? So when you are dealing with a franchise, which is either like myself or, hospitality or any of these franchises that you go to, you can have really high level conversations. And again, as the examples I would continue with, I've got some people like that are getting my pipeline that have got 2 or 3 different businesses, and they can talk really high level saying, look, this is the site that we're looking for with this sort of incentive, and it can all be stacked up really quickly. So yeah, just to probably put a button on the real estate pillar, it's really just, can you learn a little bit of pieces of language in there to set yourself up for success when you are trying to deal with the experts? If I sort of move that into my second pillar that I would spend a lot of time on, it would be marketing. So that's a part that I think all businesses are starting to realize, and ones that have made the leap forward have done it really well in the marketing field. And that is, most businesses have to understand, especially service-based, that they're not a bricks and mortar business anymore. They're a digital business that gives you access to bricks and mortar. But there's clearly a gap there, and that is your marketing ability. So when I look at owning a gym, again, it's learning the language. You don't have to be an expert in it, but it's understanding the emphasis, the priority that marketing that will take up. So if I use, again, gyms for an example, just learning what CPL is, like cost per lead, because you're going to be in that game. You're going to be trying to acquire prospects if you're owning a gym. So try to understand from a break-even perspective, what is an average cost per lead? So if you're starting to talk about a pre-sale and you go, well, I need, say for a Jets gym, anywhere from 350 to 500 members as a break-even, you start breaking down an average cost per lead. And as an example, if your average cost per lead lead is $3, then now you can work backwards of, okay, what's my budget need to be? And I see it time and time again of people that have no knowledge of marketing. They don't know it's a numbers game in that part. So working on that part is, really important. What's your thoughts on it, mate? What's your thoughts, given that you've jumped into business yourself and you've seen your marketing explode? What's your overarching thoughts on it?
Yeah, so far it's aligned. I mean, I think marketing specifically around knowing your numbers is very important. So sort of a mathematical element of the marketing. Often people will forget, even including myself, about, let's say, the importance of pre-sale and the specific numbers of people you need to, let's say, aim to break even. The first instance, it was a little bit hit and miss, I must say. Like, it's a humbling experience, and some may learn the hard way and fall hard. But yes, the marketing, particularly once you found that site, to really understand those important levers around the numbers, the cost per lead in particular, the avenues, the mediums that you're going to actually take up, is it Google, is it Facebook, and so on, they're going to help really dictate the success of that opening of the gym. If we're specifically talking marketing in terms of a grand opening of sorts or a pre-sale, I think absolutely. And yeah, what are the other important levers there then? So we've got the real estate, the marketing, and what would be the next one for you?
Yeah, no, it's certainly one more. I think even just to touch on, to wrap up marketing, if I added just a little bit more context after cost per lead, and I explain this quite simply, is you learn cost per lead, learn your cost per acquisition, so the total cost of acquiring a customer. And then the last one, which helps you make the mathematical equation, is your lifetime value. And the easy way I explain marketing to people is, get your lifetime value. So say, as an example, you use a gym customer, lifetime value is 2 years, so call it $2,000, and you work out that your cost per acquisition is $40. You work out your cost per lead is $3. It's a little bit of a game there. When you break it down to really simplistic terms, you're saying for every $40 you pay, you're going to get lifetime value of $2,000. So when you break it down like that, it's actually quite simple. You start asking yourself, well, how many times do I want to put that in? So then it's building out the mediums like you spoke to, but really understanding, well, what is your lifetime? If you have a lifetime value issue that you're having customers drop off in any domain after 3 months or 5 months, and you're spending, as an example, $2,500 to acquire a customer and your lifetime value is $2,000, well, there's clearly an issue with how you're acquiring the customers. But if you've got the maths quite well, which, for my industry, in the gym industry, those numbers are probably similar. So there's always a return on investment on there, but it's understanding those numbers to start with. And then you can pull, your mediums apart. You can start to create a really strategic marketing plan about, how you're going to acquire more customers.
Massively, man. That's really important to know. That's a great way of putting it quite succinctly. And then obviously if you want them for 2 years, then it's a lot of value. So you need to kind of provide that value to keep that member happy and potentially referring too, right? Because you could get into a bit more complexity here, but then you've got someone who's happy, who's referring, and that's assuming, right? We're assuming that they're for 2 years and therefore that lifetime value is drip fed over that period. So then you got to account for a 24-month cycle of that investment coming through versus if they're not happy within 3 months, then it's very costly, right? So is there anything to talk about around kind of keeping the value, keeping that customer, that lifetime value, and providing the value for that client? And what are some of the things that you guys have found successful at Jets?
I think it's going to be based on obviously every industry and sometimes in the business owner. So I know for us, we have a lot of strategic touch points sort of every 6 to 8 weeks, which are often free giveaways that are led towards exercise physiologists or personal trainers to continue their programming. So that's a big touch point for us. It's automated into a lot of our member management systems so that it's going out there. It's not going to be led on human resources. And that's probably an overarching thing I would take out of it. Whatever retention practice you put out, it's only as good as the automation behind it. So that's one foundation that we find to be quite successful, especially people first entering the industry. We do know that they're in the beginner phase for at least 12 months. So nurturing through that process is really, really important. The next part, at least from a Jets perspective, is we've got really, really high brand standards. So what I mean by that is, the audit procedures, and I've seen visibility from what the club managers do across the industry. We've got really high touch points in that of what they're held accountable to and what our state performance managers hold them accountable to. It's sort of indirect, but if I'm talking to our now experienced lifters, their expectations to stay on as a member is a very clean facility with working equipment. So if you want to service them in a retention, it's making sure that you are servicing your club. And it might just sound simple, but I'm sure you've been the same. You walk into a club and the seated row's been out of order for 4 weeks. So we've got a few, I won't bore you with them, but we've got a few non-negotiables of timelines to have equipment fixed, cleaning and hygiene standards, which are enforced from a club manager to a business performance manager all the way up.
Yeah, and that's important, isn't it, to have these strict adherences? And I think those non-negotiables, obviously machinery is up to speed, the cleanliness and many other considerations, that these small things really matter, don't they? Because then you get that frustrated customer who then goes and, becomes was a raving fan, sort of blurts the opposite things. So I think these are very important. And oftentimes even newbies or even seasoned contenders can potentially be complacent with these adherences. So we've got non-negotiables. And I think you're correct earlier about retention. It's easy to flounder some ideas, but then if you don't have the automations in place, pardon me, it can become very problematic, because then, the intentions just don't get followed through. Something gets piled up on another thing and another thing. So automations when it comes to retentions, and then have some non-negotiables, which is key. Because I'm thinking here as well, Dan, is that it's not just for franchisees, but this is for any type of business owner, whether it's a small box gym, so to speak, that having these standards will allow them to kind of have a smoother succession of ensuring members' success, that is. Good. All right. So we've covered that pretty well. I mean, we're not diving into full specifics, but I think getting the picture of the real estate, and there's probably other components that obviously you might want to dive into. We can go back and forth. So continue on, Dan, if you may. Yeah. What follows from marketing then?
Yeah, look, I think for me, the last pillar is team and support. So if you could nail a really good lease and all that encompasses real estate pillar, and you can be quite competent in the marketing part, the next tier is your team and support. And what I mean by that is it could be yourself, you could be a one-man band, or it could be having to hire a team. So that spreads out quite wide. But I always start from just aligning yourself with time. So, set up, if you're going to be a one-man band or it's going to be a club manager that's going to be working in, say, the fitness field, working out time, roles and responsibilities. So for example, if I'm coming in as an investor model and I'm going to be quite hands-off in it. So I'm going to be doing, 2 to 4 hours per week. Well, then there's clearly some parts of the business that I'm going to have to offload to a club manager. So what I mean by that is now the role and the responsibilities and expectations have to change. The remuneration package probably has to change, because now you're looking to acquire a different person. And I do see some people get that wrong. And it's really basic, just working out from a time perspective. Using that example, you've come in as an investor, you're not looking to overlook P&Ls or some of these sort of financial decisions. You really want a club manager to do all of it, which they can, but you've went and hired someone that doesn't have the skill set. It can be problematic. And then if I flipped it and I said, okay, you're going to be doing everything. So an owner operator that is going to be doing everything from, the financial to the marketing plan to member onboarding. There's probably, and this is where I always advise the one-man band people to go get feedback about what's feasible, because often the one-man bands, things do fall through and things basically get, fall into the choice management sphere where the business owner has to start making choices of, what has to be done. So knowing ahead of time, here is my choice management matrix of what is the most, important to the business all the way down ahead of time before you open a business. If you're going to be relying on yourself on a 40 to 50 hour week, that's really, really important. And then the third category is if you're going to build out a team and you're saying, okay, I'm going to be involved in the business for X amount of time. I'm going to have a club manager that's going to be doing this and this, and then I'm going to have some support sales staff on board. It's really then defining, okay, what are their roles and responsibilities? What contributes success? Who manages who all the way down? And, to be fair, probably not enough people do that level. They just go, look, I'm just going to set up a business and just work it out. And then you get into the thick of it and, yourself, your own business. Once you're in, you can't see out. It's very easy ahead of time to look down and have a bird's eye view. But once you're in there, it's very hard to go ask for help, because all of a sudden you think you're different and it only happens to me and, I can change this. So knowing ahead of time, speaking to really successful business owners, talking to some that probably weren't as successful and getting, some ideas, and then building out what your ideal avatar looks like for team and support, and then matching them accordingly.
Totally true. I mean, that's another lesson that I had in the past, was hiring a manager based on their technical proficiency. So never really had a strict criteria for all of the other important elements, like your financial metrics and knowing the numbers and so forth. And, whilst the classes were a good experience, other things were failing. So then, myself or the business partner at the time had to then step in, and it really took opportunity. It was an opportunity cost with having to step in and fulfill the role that really we needed to clarify as that individual, that club manager needed to do. So that's such an important point you made there. I think really clarifying those roles and responsibilities and getting everyone to sign off on them, and then therefore obviously finding that right person to execute. Can't be enough said on that. Absolutely.
was going to say, just on that, I think there's a lot of success, at least what I've seen in the past, whereby it's hospo or restaurant or gym game where the joint ventures work quite well. So someone might be coming in where they've got the capital but don't have the desired skill set. And then they go out to tender to try to find that unique skill set. And they might chop off more than they would be thinking would be ideal, but the long-term, results speak for themselves. So I think the JV is probably where, and I often, expose that conversation in my discovery calls when I see someone's set of criteria is going to be good for short-term success as in getting a gym up and running, but then ongoingly they won't be able to service it with their current skill set and their expectations are not aligned with what is actually cool. So I often challenge them saying, look, I think, you clearly fine from a capital perspective, you've got the money to service it, but potentially missing a few gaps in these skills. So go check out these gyms where I know there's some really credible people in them for to build out an avatar of, okay, that's actually who I should be looking for, or I can match them in my pipeline, people that potentially don't have enough capital, but are really hands-on strong. They're running businesses at the moment, and it can be a really strong, match there. Because I think, understanding your roles and responsibility, as you said there, is absolutely crucial once the door's open. Doesn't matter if your real estate's, really, really good. If your roles and responsibilities are great, performance can drag.
Yeah, and you made an equally excellent point, which is that sometimes you may have that energy or the skill set to get you going in the short term, get the facility up and it's hit that critical amount of members that you need for break even, but then it can, as you say, fall apart if you don't have the medium to long term implementation of that team and support. And so this is interesting. So as we kind of recap these pillars, you've got the real estate element into the marketing, into team support. Is there any, would you say, period of time, almost like how we would periodize programming for an athlete, let's say, what would you suggest? I mean, this could be months out, of course, before opening a facility. Is there any sort of formula or kind of preparation time that you think's necessary? Like, let's say it's a solo operator who's decided to open up a small box in order to get these pillars kind of correct. And of course, there's going to be variables, right? Like when it comes to negotiation and everything. But is there a ballpark figure there that you could share with the listener?
Yeah, and I think what we're talking about here is like pre-awareness of these pillars. So I think there's at least 6 months of gaining awareness of those topics at a minimum. It does take a long time, just specifically on the real estate side. Having a discussion, as you know, with a landlord, you're probably getting an email reply once a week. So if you're trying to upskill yourself and you're doing some cold emails or cold calls, your rate of return is like one email sometimes a week. So if you want to get ahead on a few different topic points around incentive and where the DA is, what the handover condition is, you probably won't get all that in one email in 1 week. That's going to take 1 month on one site to get information pool. So you can, that if you wanted to go, okay, well, I need a sample size of at least 5 pieces of real estate to, A, B, C, D, E test them. Well, there's probably 3 to 4 months maybe to get them all going just from the time management piece.
Yeah. So, of course, within that 3 to 4 months, let's say, the focus could still be on marketing as well. So it's not like you need that done necessarily and then marketing. So it's obviously a bit more fluid than that. But it's good to know that the expectations, like going in, hang on, I'm expecting a turnaround of a week or 2 weeks to kind of get my answer about a particular location. So the first thing, though, is to have that sort of criteria. DA obviously is a massive one, engineering, all of those real crucial elements that need to be kind of checked off, coupled with looking at the desired location. And as you said right at the beginning, you're going to go and potentially tackle a facility that the rent seems cheap. It's a big warehouse, but yet, you don't have the other facilities that help support it, right? What was the word you used again? The co-shared or the co-leasing?
Like joint venture.
Joint, yeah. So obviously, if you've got complementary businesses, the rent might be higher, but in the long term, it's going to be much more sustainable. So I think that's a really crucial point. And therefore, can you actually fund that venture, right? Because now you're like, well, hang on, my expectation was that the rent would be $500 a week, but now we're looking at $1,000. But yet, over the long term, there's going to be a greater rate of success. So some really crucial things here. And then second to that, if you're a solopreneur, then potentially a joint venture, as you said, could mean the difference, even if you have to give up a chunk of your business to ensure a long-term success. Because I think I can recall having to learn to let go of my control. And I think you're right, is if you don't consider that team and support pillar and all of a sudden you step in and you're doing everything your way, you only see just from your perspective, you lose the objectivity, right? So I think that's a crucial element, is to look at how much degree of control do I as the business owner have? Like I'm thinking, for example, okay, if I only want to be there for the first 6 months at X amount of hours, 2 to 3 hours a week, but I know at the beginning I need to put in 30, 40 hours, am I going to be that control freak then who actually can't find that right personnel, Dan, to actually help fulfill because they're not as good as me, right? Have you learned what would you add to that, because I think that's an important perspective too.
Yeah, like specific on the control part or just on the length of time, which one?
Yeah, the control. Like, I think, for example, if me stepping in, I've got, 3 months to get the business up and running, right, to get the launch. But then I can't find that right person because they're not as good as me, right? Like, are there any lessons that you have to share around that conundrum or potential one?
Potential, yeah. Look, I think it just goes back to the planning, like that planning piece, and people don't do enough of it, which is knowing ahead of time what their roles and responsibilities are going to be like. I look at it like overarching, we're talking about time and it sort of relates to it. But if we're thinking about when people purchase a house, it's a big, often their biggest purchase of their life. They're going to spend, on realestate.com in Australia and a few other alternate websites, hours per week. They will go visit many, many sites, and a lot of time will go into envisioning what does their life look like. Where, can they get to their childcare? Can they go to school? What does work look like? But we don't apply the same principles to a business. What does my day-by-day life look like when I enter this business? Can I still see my partner as much? What I have to pull back on, like what principles of control do I have to let go to have success? There's a lot of similarities, I think, in there in terms of getting into purchasing real estate that aren't shown in the business case. That should be. That's a big one there. Just spending time looking at 10 to 15 different businesses. For a real estate side, you're going to go to 15 auctions, you're going to walk through purchasing a business. I always say, go talk to at least 15 people that own that specified business, ask them for a coffee, pay them some money. It's a small amount of money. You pay that money in Australia for building and pests to do your due diligence. You've got to pay money. And yet people don't want to pay money, talk to an expert in their field. But it's, you're asking for, some often gold guidance that will take you leaps and bounds ahead than you would be had you otherwise not asked.
Yeah, it's brilliant. That's really well said. So it's really kind of stepping out of that comfort zone, or at least a conventional comfort zone, call it, where it's maybe not taught, right, in the, call it the schooling curriculum, whether that be TAFE or what have you. So yeah, it's really important, that coaching communication and actually stepping out of your comfort zone to have a coffee or invite a conversation. Because most people, I think, are okay at giving up their time if they feel that that person's coming with the right intention. So I've experienced that too, where people have approached me and said, yeah, let's sit down and I might be able to give you some advice that could help you with A, B, and C. So really, really good point there, Dan, because I think that overrides everything, because in the end, then that will dictate the intention then to then getting these pillars up and running, the real estate, the marketing, and the team and support. Now, you put some really cool notes together on this. Are we okay adding that to the show notes for the listeners?
Yeah, we'll tidy some up. I think it's a bit of scribble, but we'll tidy it up and we'll chuck it in there for sure.
Dan's going to do that. I think this is a very valuable topic. Those of you who, like myself in the past, and of course, Dan, whether it's a franchise and you're interested, of course, you can reach out to Dan about the franchise elements, I'm sure. We'll add Dan's social media handles and how we can be found. So that would be one thing. And then those of you who may not be interested in a franchise, you're interested in opening up your own box, call it, your own facility, really these pillars and these considerations that really Dan's generously gone through with us, it really must be, I believe, just listened to again, because again, if I wound back the clock, I don't regret anything, but the lessons that I learned are really sinking into these particular pillars to make sure that there's some reflection time, and that reflection time includes maybe speaking to some of these mentors or people who have been there, done that, and are doing that, right, at a successful level, as well as just doing due diligence, whether it takes 3 months of getting the real estate element of them getting back to you. In the meantime, really getting your marketing right, like the CPL, cost per lead, cost per acquisition, and then the lifetime value. And you know that, hey, in the end, this is what we need to achieve, 50 members to open up, for example. So this is really good stuff. It's a good reminder for those maybe who need to be reminded and potentially looking to go back into buying something, so that's even including folk like mine, but those who are excited, they like, I want to go out and I want to have my own facility because that's what everyone else is doing. Because in the end, you might go, hang on, no, I'm not going to do that, right? So you disqualify yourself as a result of actually going through these processes. So one final question I want to ask you, Dan, is if you could change one thing about the health, fitness, wellness industry as it presently is, what would it be?
I think I would probably look at it from a government perspective. I think there should be some rebates available for people that, exercise. So we've got rebates currently going through on sort of the NDIS space and DVA space, but I think overarchingly, I think it should be sort of subsidised. I know our governing body, AusActive, are doing some work in that space, but I think, Australia's obesity rate, speaks for itself where we're situated, and we've only climbed higher and higher. So if we could sort of create some impact from a government level where we're creating some influence over rebate and measures around that, I think that would be something I would want to change.
And specifically rebates for those who are members and they get money back when they pay for a membership?
Yeah, correct.
Okay, that level, yeah. Because I think at one point in time in Australia, that was active. Maybe the criteria has changed. And I totally agree with you, 100%. So let's rally together along with us as individuals, collectives, as, Oz Active and so on, really need to push for this because you're right, it's preventative, right? And an ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure, right? As they say. So let's adhere to that totally. Dan, really appreciate your time. And again, folks, for those of you who are really diligent, we'll have some notes that Dan's going to kindly share and you can follow and reach out to Dan as well. So Dan, thank you for your time and your insights too.
I appreciate it, Tarek. Yeah, just to echo that, if anyone wants any feedback or support, feel free to reach out.
Thank you for being a part of our podcast community. We work hard to create content that we hope you enjoy and find valuable. If you haven't already, we would be honored if you would consider subscribing and following us on your favorite platform. That way, you'll never miss an episode and you'll always be the first to know when new episodes are released. We truly appreciate your support and we can't wait to continue to grow and connect with you through our podcast.